families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone. On this week's edition of Families Divided TV, retired Israeli judge Phillip Marcus speaks to us about how churches and religious organizations are dealing with parental alienation. Also, Dr. Colleen Murray will have a segment on how science and spirituality intersect. We'll have these in just a moment.
At Victor's Crown, our focus is on you, our clients. When you arrive, our goal is that you will feel at home, from our welcoming atmosphere to our serene surroundings. Everything we do at Victor's Crown is done with our clients in mind. We have comfortable seating areas for both adults and children. A large screen TV with surround sound where clients can be occupied with wholesome entertainment while they wait. We offer complimentary refreshments such as coffee, tea, water, and snacks. Due to the present COVID pandemic, our in-person appointments are restricted to selected cases, and those are held in our luxurious outdoor open-air meeting space that we affectionately refer to as the COVID Cabana, which was built specifically for our clients to offer them the most comfortable and relaxing outdoor space available. All our other clients are offered secured web-based telemed sessions where they can connect with us from anywhere in the world.
Hello, everyone. I hope this talk will be helpful to religious leaders and also to their congregants and anybody who's involved in a religious congregation, be it a church or a mosque or a synagogue. I am approaching the issue of child-parent contact problems or child-parent contact failure, not only from the point of view of a retired judge. I dealt with many of these cases when I was a judge. Before that, when I was a lawyer, I dealt with these cases, and afterwards as a researcher and lecturer, but also as an Orthodox Jew who tries to live his life according to the dictates of my particular religion. And I'm sure that each of you listening to this talk has a personal philosophy which is dictated to a great extent by his religious views. And I want to add one more thing, and that is from the book of Genesis. I think we can learn practically everything there is to learn about good and failed family relationships. Adam and Eve were alone. They had sons. Cain then killed Abel, and what happened to his family. And we have the forefathers, Abraham and his relationship with Ishmael and with Isaac. We have Isaac and his relationship with Jacob and Esau, and Jacob and his relationship with his sons, and the tensions between Joseph and his brothers. And accompanying all of these people are their wives, who play an extremely important role in the structure of the family and the conduct of the family. So we look at our matriarchs, Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel, as giving the tone to family relationships. But I have said this before, it may annoy some people, but if you want to know about the psychology of family relationships, then you should be looking at the book of Genesis and other books of the Bible, which deal with family relationships. So that is in a way my starting point. Now, it should not need to be emphasized that parents who get together and have the intention of bringing up children are in fact investing from their own history and their own philosophy in setting up a new generation. And that this new generation, it's clearly the intention of parents that the new generation, the children, should be healthy, physically, of course, but also mentally and emotionally. And it's their responsibility to protect the children from anything which might affect that. And the role of the community, which in many cases is a religious community, is to support that. And the role of religious leaders, both those who are priests or ministers or pastors or rabbis or qadis, but also the lay leaders of a congregation who have an interest in the continuing success of the congregation. All of these have an interest in making sure that family relationships are, as far as possible, preserved. There are, as we know, religions in which divorce is prohibited or exceptionally difficult. There are those in which divorce is pretty easy. But what we need to be focusing on is what happens to the children if the parents don't get on well, and if that leads to divorce, or if divorce can be prevented, but only in such a way that will preserve the welfare of the children. And as we know, there are some couples who really ought to get divorced because they cannot get on properly. They cannot communicate in a positive way with each other. They may not be communicating at all, or they may be communicating only by shouting, by verbal or even physical violence. They may not be able to resolve problems in a proper fashion. So that the role of the religious leadership is to identify the first signs that this may be happening, and not leave it to the couple to try to work things out for themselves, because help is available. There are therapists and there are lay leaders, and there's some ministers who may know enough about it to be able to offer their help at the earliest possible stage. Also, the teachers in Sunday schools and those who look after the religious education of the children, they need to be aware of the signs that a child may be suffering and reacting badly to a dispute with the parents. In addition, religious organizations have an interest in the intergenerational continuation of the messages of their religion. That means that grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins may have a role to play in helping a child who is going through the problems between the parents and their separation and maybe their divorce. So that it's in the interests of the religious organization and religious leaders that children who are faced with this situation should be helped in the best possible way. How do we go about this? So the first rung, and really the most essential, is education and training for religious and lay leaders, so that they will be aware of what happens to a child whose parents are separating and whose parents may be divorcing. It's unfortunately very much part of our modern lives that a lot of parents split up and the child may be moving from one house to another. Parents may separate and live long distances one from another, which makes the physical contact between the child and the parents a matter of long distances, cost, and time. And all these need to be factored in. The point here is that the focus should be on the child, and that each child is different. Each child has different needs, even within the same family. We, thank God, have 7 children and lots of grandchildren, and each child has his or her own personality, his or her own sensitivities, his or her own reactions to what's going on around them. It's the job of the parents and of the wider family to observe these children and to be aware of their specific needs, and to make sure that any arrangements that are made should be adapted to the needs of that specific child. And if in a Sunday school class, a third or a half of the children come from separated families, this should not be regarded as being ordinary and normative, because each child is going through his or her own process in both realizing the situation and adapting to that situation. And children grow up. A child at the age of 2 whose parents are separating has very different needs from a child of 8, and a child of 8 from a child of 13, and a child of 13 from a child of 17. So that when counseling and advising parents about how to organize the separation and how to organize the arrangements for the children, due account needs to be taken of the need to adjust those arrangements as the child grows up and as the child develops his or her own personality and specific needs. Even when there may be 3 or 4 or 5 children in the family, it's not really good enough. And I can speak to that in my experience as a judge and previously as a lawyer. It is simply wrong to make arrangements for all the children to be with dad on certain days and with mom on other days, because an older child will have all kinds of peer relationships, will have more pressures from school, will have youth groups, which a younger child may not have. So the emphasis here is on the needs of each specific child. The next area in which lay leaders and clergy need help is to understand the things that can go really badly wrong if the separation between the parents is not properly managed. And we're talking here about situations in which one parent influences a child to have no contact with the other parent and that parent's family. This, of course, is devastating for the parent with whom the child has no contact, and devastating for the grandparents and uncles and aunts who may have had a good relationship with the child. But the effects on the child, as I'm sure you've heard in these broadcasts, are devastating in terms of the child's ability to make relationships in the future, both parent relationships and couple relationships, but also the child, while he's growing up and is subjected to all of these pressures and to all of these incidents, may seek help outside the family, and not always with the people who are best equipped and best able to provide a positive support. What this means is that religious leaders might want to consider matching up a child whose parents are divorcing with a youngster, perhaps a young adult, perhaps a student of religion or student of social work or psychology, as a kind of big brother. So there's somebody with whom the child can be in contact and can share his difficulties and his concerns. Professionals, and in this group I include clergy, also need to be aware of all the services available for parents who are separating and for their children in order to help them through the process. I'm not talking here specifically about lawyers, although lawyers may be important in order to enable that an agreement can properly be drawn up. I'm talking more about counselors. And let there be no doubt, counseling a family, members of a family going through separation and divorce, is not something that should be taken on by a person who has no training in the field. I've come across situations, and I'm sure many of you have come across situations in which a well-meaning but poorly or ill-educated person gives advice which turns out to be wrong and maybe the opposite of what's needed in the given situation. It's not a matter of surprise to anybody that a person who's going through a divorce will be consulting and discussing with people, friends, colleagues, family members. And these people, since they have no professional training, have no idea how to properly counsel and advise. So it's essential that clergy and lay leaders who feel it important to give advice and consultation to parents and children in these situations, it's essential that before they start, they should seek out professionals and organizations who can give them the proper guidance, training, education as to how to go about this. Because a misplaced word or a misplaced gesture can make the difference between a child who is going to grow up and thrive despite the chaos in the family, and a child whose life as a child and as an adult is going to be adversely affected by what the child went through. So that the point here is that if a pastor, a reverend, priest, qadi, rabbi, or a religious leader comes into contact with a situation in which a child may be affected by parental strife and parental separation, that person needs to be very clear and have an answer to the following question. Do I have the necessary training and have I had the necessary education in order to enable me properly to give advice, or should I admit that my knowledge and my experience is limited and therefore I should refer these people to somebody who does have the necessary training and experience? The stakes are very high. We're talking about the lives of children and the lives of their children, because it's well known that a child who's been alienated from a parent is far more likely when he or she grows up to have an alienated relationship with his or her own children. And that is just a disaster for the next generation. So to sum up, the church and synagogue and mosque leaders need to emphasize the responsibilities that couples have one to another, the responsibilities they have to their children, even when the couple relationship is breaking up. Church leaders and clergy and religious leaders need to be educated about the effects that separation can have on a child, and particularly what happens if a child is alienated from a parent, and the leaders of these religious groups, both professional and lay leaders, need to get the necessary education and training in order that they shall be able both to identify the problems which may be arising and in order to address those problems immediately before they become chronic and pathological, and also to enable them to know whether they have the necessary training and education in order to help them to intervene, in which cases need to be referred out to people of the appropriate professions.
Families Divided will return in a moment.
Okay, I hope all of you have your pen and paper or pencils. And tonight I will be talking to you about forgiveness and how spirituality helped make this a science. First, we'll walk through some steps on processing the negative emotions that can block your ability or my ability to forgive. Second, within my presentation, I will provide answers to questions that our audience submitted in advance. And then lastly, I'll wrap it up. Now, I know from working with people who have been through trauma, which includes being alienated from children, when some of you saw this title, you might have thought, forgiveness? Are you kidding me? You don't know what I've been through. And forgiveness feels like it trivializes or minimizes what's happened or what is happening to me. And you're right. I don't know what each of you have been through. You each have your own unique stories. But what I do know is trauma and the mind-body connection and how damaging trauma can be on both your mind and body. Therefore, my mission has always been to help people heal so that they can be the best versions of themselves and walk in the purpose for which they were created. So, if you stay with me through this webinar, you will see this is more than a teaching. It is actually a call to action to understand what forgiveness is and is not, why it is so valuable, and how to get started on the journey of forgiveness for your own peace of mind. This is a war that is waging every day in courts, a silent and not so well-known war, but nevertheless, still with all the characteristics of a war. There's extreme violence, aggression, destruction, and or death. And in the battle over custody of children, the children have become the prisoners of wars, the POWs, if you will, trapped in the camp of an alienated parent who is engaged in warlike behavior, extreme violence, as they go to treat great or exaggerated lengths to radicalize the children from the marriage into believing that a loving and fit parent is now abusive and unfit, entering into activities of hostility, the acts of aggression against the targeted parent, giving rise to the destruction and or the death of the relationship bonds between the targeted parent and the child, and even the targeted parent's extended family. All this can leave the targeted parent deeply wounded and in pain that literally alters their life, while at the same time leaving them feeling as if no one will ever validate the egregious wrongs committed against them. As we begin this journey through forgiveness, I want to remind you of a quote from a renowned theologist, Lewis Smedes, whose work brought about the intersection of science and spirituality. He said, "It would give us some great comfort if we could only forget a past that we could not change. If we could only choose to forget the cruelest moments, we could, as time goes on, free ourselves from the pain. But the wrong sticks like a needle in our memory. And the only way to remove the needle is with the surgical precision called forgiveness. So let's talk about what forgiveness is and is not. There are two casualties in this war, the targeted parent and the children. However, for this discussion, we'll be focusing on the targeted parent and their journey. In my practice, I often see targeted parents who ruminate on the assaults made by the alienating parent. And these excessive and intrusive thoughts regarding their negative experiences result in emotional distress, which manifests as fear, anger, and resentment. And this in turn affects how they respond to the alienation, namely presenting as either a desire for vengeance or actively avoiding. Neither choice is healthy for you. But now you might be saying, okay, I get that. But what am I to do? Well, this is where you'll need to be willing to forgive. Now, I can hear some of you now rolling your eyes, and you may be thinking, yeah, right. I'm still in the middle of this awful situation. It has literally turned my life into a living hell. No one appreciates what I'm going through. There is no end in sight, and you say I should forgive? How? They won't even acknowledge what they've done. Besides, if I forgive them, then that means they've won. And on top of that, it makes it seem as though what they're doing is not a big deal. And I'm sure how am I supposed to forgive what they've done? I do understand when your life has been devastated, that forgiveness feels very unrealistic. But forgiveness is not about giving in anything to them. It's about you. A wounded heart only supplies a fraction of the love it is normally able to give out. The truth is that hurting people hurt people. And forgiveness is not about asking you to set them free from the responsibility or consequences of their actions. Forgiveness is about you being willing to set yourself free by taking your power back from the alienator and by refusing to be their victim any longer.
To see more of this presentation from Dr. Colleen Murray, please visit our Families Divided TV YouTube channel. Next week on Families Divided, Dr. Sue Kornbluth and Dr. Mary Alvarez join Dr. Colleen Murray to talk about the role of mental health professionals in the world of alienation.